This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But let's start with a run through the markets with a particular focus on South Africa. Discovery, the South African insurer, has actually warned that full-year earnings could fall by anywhere between 70 to 90%, due in part to a $191 million provision for claims linked to this pandemic. It will also not be paying an annual dividend. Now, prior to this, Discovery shares were 12% lower on a year-to-date basis. They were 51% in the red by end March. They've had a bit of recovery in the second quarter. Telkom also issued a profit warning, citing the combined hit from the pandemic, but also the one-off costs from a layoff program. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll explore Kenya Airways' plans to return to the skies amidst the coronavirus pandemic. Efforts get underway to revive some of South Africa's state-owned entities. And France returns to business after a relatively strict lockdown. Let's start the hour in the world of aviation, specifically with Kenya Airways. The carrier expects passenger flights to resume at the earliest in September, but with relatively low capacity. Now, that resumption will essentially end over 5 months of lost revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to KQ management, this is the best case scenario for them, but the airline is cautioning that the ultimate length of suspension of the passenger flight business is still pretty uncertain. The national carrier stopped international flights after a state order on the 22nd of March that effectively cut off KQ's flow of new revenues at a time when it had no cash reserves and is still in a negative equity position. The airline says that discussions with key industry stakeholders are still on in relation to a safe return to passenger routes. It is expected that the airline will be able to cover its variable costs at least once it gets back in the sky. In the meantime, the Kenya Association of Travel Agents will soon be adopting a policy that will see travel agents cease from extending credit facilities for travel to their customers. Now, among the affected will be corporate clients, government agencies, NGOs and traders. A large chunk of these earmarked clients book for travel and then pay over an extended period of time. This new policy, however, will ensure that travel agents remain operational in times of crisis, as seen with this pandemic. Since the first case of the infection was reported here in Kenya in the middle of March, business has dropped to negative levels for travel agents. This comes after the government's announced travel restrictions within the country, not just outside it, and a ban on international flights for passengers as well. So then let's get into the details of this with Agnes Mushuha. She's the CEO of the Kenya Association of Travel Agents, who joins me on the line. Thank you for your time this evening, Agnes. Let's start with a broad picture. Airport traffic in the first quarter shows us an unprecedented drop in traffic between February and March. A 60% decline in total, a 38% decline in traffic from Amsterdam and Dubai, 43% less traffic within East Africa. Give us a sense of the state of the industry right now.
Thank you very much for inviting us to this show. The travel industry has been adversely affected by the COVID situation. The numbers that you have just shared have actually been overtaken by events, because now you're looking at a scenario where we are on zero sales since the period April, and the projections are that in Kenya we are going to carry on up until the month of July. When you look at Africa as a continent, from an IATA standpoint, we are projecting $84.3 billion in loss. And what you're looking at is that the main contributor to this is because of the suspension of air traffic, and also the reality that most of the passengers do not have confidence yet for travel. So all the unique city pairs that had been built up in terms of connectivity for people, capital, technology, and even ideas will all take a back seat purely because now travel is extensively depressed.
Last week's budget, the Kenya government budget for the next fiscal year, which starts in July, provided some proposals for direct support for the tourism and travel sector. It included about 3 billion shillings, that's about $28 million, in credit facilities through the Tourism Finance Corporation. In your view, does that go far enough? And is this the kind of support that the industry needs at the moment?
We welcome the funds that the government allocated to the sector. Of course, the funds will not adequately cover the current need that is there. The pressing and urgent need for the travel industry is access to working capital, because right now the lights have been switched off in most of the shops, and primarily this is because the airline industry has been suspended in the country. So the primary trigger factor here is working capital injection. And what the sector is really looking forward to is access to loans that are guaranteed by the government, and also access to working capital financing, and access to tax reliefs that will also stimulate travel through reduced air ticket taxes.
As an industry, what are the sort of recovery scenarios that you're looking at, not just now, but also into 2021? Because there is a fairly strong chance that on the international side, the confidence that you're talking about for people to get on a plane from London or Dubai to come down here to Kenya, that might not recover until well into next year.
What we are projecting as an industry is that the domestic segment will recover initially, and you will have an incremental and progressive recovery of the international sector. International travel is primarily driven by various factors, and what we are foreseeing is that your short-haul flights, these are flights within a travel time of less than 5 hours, will be the immediate connectivity, connecting points that will recover. And you're looking at cities such as Dubai, you're looking at cities such as Doha, where you'll be having the 2022 World Cup taking place. You're looking at cities in the Indian subcontinent. All these short-haul legs will recover immediately. And most importantly, the region intra-Africa travel will also recover quite robustly, because again, from a consumer confidence point of view, people will have more confidence traveling within a very short radius vis-a-vis undertaking long-haul flights, as were the case in the prior to the COVID situation.
Indeed. Let's come back to the local industry, because between now and when international clients come back, that's the only play that the industry has. How do we make this sustainable going forward?
Domestic travel will not really be sustainable for the country. When you look at the TRI data for 2019, we had 70% of the arrivals at JKIA Airport, which amounts to about 1.4 million passengers, being international arrivals. Domestic travel falls actually less than 10% in the country, and 10% of the passenger traffic cannot really sustain the sector. So we are heavily dependent on international travel as a main GDP driver for the country, and also the main employment contributor for the country, because of the domino effect that is contributed to by the aviation industry in the country.
One quick follow-up on that. Why is it that the domestic market is not enough to sustain the industry? Is this a problem of the quality, or not necessarily the quality, the range of services that are being offered, or is it an affordability problem? What is it that's holding back more Kenyans, more Ugandans, more Tanzanians from traveling within the region and essentially propping up the domestic tourism sector?
There are two factors. When you look at domestic tourism in terms of just travel within the country, that is limited because of the economic drivers. The main purpose for travel in Kenya, it's because of leisure travel. Leisure travel is seasonal, and seasonal travel cannot really sustain an economy. When you look at the motivation as far as commercial activities are concerned, Mombasa is one of the biggest markets, followed by Kisumu, but the level of trade activity in those cities has diminished over time due to the changes that have taken place within those economic zones. Intra-Africa travel, on the other hand, is underexploited, and this is primarily because of the gap that exists in the market as far as product knowledge is concerned, and also the absence of aggressive intra-Africa marketing to create that awareness and to stimulate the requisite demand that will then push for travel within the continent.
Indeed. Agnes Bushuha from the Kenya Association of Travel Agents. Always good to have you on the program. Thank you very much for your insights. Now, with travel beyond the borders effectively halted and gatherings in public restricted, as you've just heard, the tourism sector pretty much across the world has suffered greatly. Kenya is one of the countries that's now making use of the digital tools available to share the unique sights and sounds that tourists, both local and domestic, can enjoy once travel resumes. Here's GTN's Wilkista Nyabwa with that report.
The two cats prowl across a grassland, at once as exciting as they are frightening. A human being wouldn't stand a chance in a race against them, but the observer is never at risk. The cats are prowling in the wild, hundreds of kilometers away, as would-be tourists watch from the safety of their homes. In the face of a worldwide pandemic that has caused countries across the globe to close their borders and restrict travel, tourism in Kenya has gone online.
If you go out of sight and you go out of mind, the challenge is, as a destination, or even when you want to come back, it means that you're going to have to invest a lot more in terms of getting people to, first of all, remember that you exist, but also remember what you exist for.
Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Tourism, Najib Balala, launched a virtual live stream showcasing game safaris and other unique cultural experiences across the country. The Kenya Tourism Board has deployed a team that will travel across the country for 6 weeks. Every day they stream on social media the best of what Kenya has to offer tourists.
The challenge we had is travel is about an experience that people have. An experience is something you have to be able to feel, to touch, to be around. So we had to find a mechanism to be able to bring that experience to people's home.
The tourism sector has been hit hard by the outbreak of COVID-19. Hotels and many tourist attractions have been forced to shut down and send workers home. Kenya is the third largest travel and tourism economy in Africa after South Africa and Nigeria. In select facilities, only a few workers remain, some guarding the wildlife against poachers. But with the daily live feed, viewers have had the opportunity to get closer to sites without the disruption of crowds. And stakeholders acknowledge that this is likely to impact tourist choices even after travel resumes.
They will be much more interested in experiences that are a lot more enriching, a lot more informative, a lot more collaborative, experiences that make a difference in places that they go to.
And when they return, the country will be waiting. Even as the world grapples with the pandemic, Kenya's tourism sector is keen to remind travelers of the magic that awaits them once travel resumes, and stakeholders are now tapping into digital tools to ensure that even after the pandemic, travelers will enjoy a fuller, richer travel experience. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
With borders closed and airlines grounded, mostly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa's multi-billion-dollar tourism industry is coming apart. From Kenya's Masai Mara to the Okavango Delta in Botswana, rural communities that also depend on foreign and domestic tourism spending for their income are hurting badly. Conservation projects, too, have not been spared either. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro now, examining the grim future ahead for game parks, lodges and travel agencies, even as countries gradually start to ease restrictions.
Hundreds of thousands depend on the tourism sector in Africa. In addition, the slump in tourist dollars has hit conservation projects hard. And even as countries around the world ease lockdown measures, game parks, lodges and travel agencies face a grim future.
We've made very few purchases of vehicles, and the most recent one was only a month before Corona struck, and in which therefore means that we are now sitting with vehicles that we're struggling to repay to the finances, and so things are very, very challenging right now because all business is gone right now.
According to an estimate by Safari Bookings, the safari industry generates some $12.4 billion in annual revenue for South Africa, Botswana, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda and Zambia, Africa's top wildlife tourist destinations. Over 300 tour operators were contacted by the online safari travel platform, and almost 93% reported a drop in bookings by at least 75% due to the pandemic.
It's been tough, and the toughest thing is the staff, because we've had to let the staff go. We paid them for the first month. Second month we paid a limited portion because tours was kicking in, and yeah, we just riding it out now. But it's not an indefinite thing. We don't know how long we can do this for.
A survey of close to 500 businesses in the Kruger-Lowveld district, South Africa's Safari Heartland, conducted by the local tourism agency last month, found that 90% of the operators believed they would not survive even if international borders opened immediately. Over 2/3 of them have laid off employees.
We save some of our money in the banks, but we just run out of money in the bank. So we'll start starving for now.
Beyond the human cost, conservationists worry that growing desperation in local communities hit by COVID-19 could fuel a wave of poaching. 3 popular game parks in South Africa recently dehorned dozens of rhinos as a preventative measure against poaching. South African Tourism Minister warned Parliament last month that up to 600,000 jobs were at risk if the sector remained shut until September. And the government's relief initiatives, like the South Africa's offer of $3,000 one-time grants to small tourism businesses, will do little to staunch the losses. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Right, then a run through some company news. CG Hospitality has gone back into East Africa following the acquisition of 2 properties from Fairmont, the Fairmont Mara Safari Club and the Fairmont Norfolk in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. This acquisition is done through a local holding company, CG Madison Kenya Limited. Now, the company says that these assets are undergoing renovations at the moment to restore their legacy. Fairmont announced that it had closed its Norfolk and Mara Safari Club hotels and essentially fined all the employees, and it blamed the pandemic for that particular move. Elsewhere, the NSE Bank Tanzania will acquire the majority of assets and all the liabilities from the Commercial Bank of Africa, Tanzania Limited. This transfer of assets comes in the wake of approvals by the Bank of Tanzania and the Fair Competition Commission over there as well. The amalgamation of these 2 banks comes in the wake of the merger between their respective parent companies, the Commercial Bank of Africa and NIC Group in Kenya. Orange, France's largest telecommunications operator, is expanding its footprint in Africa, and it will give itself a few months to make that possible move. The Middle East and Africa, where Orange has a presence in about 18 different markets, is the company's fastest growing market. The region makes a large chunk of its revenues from payment transfers, a key part of the group's diversification into financial services. And Egypt's Ministry of International Cooperation has signed an agreement with France's development agency to finance a project to renovate the Cairo Metro First Line. Now, the project aims to renovate and modernize a 44-kilometer stretch of the North-South Cairo Metro line. That agreement was inked under Egypt's multilateral cooperation framework among development partners, which brings together the French Development Agency, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the European Investment Bank. That's the run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at the latest in efforts to revive some of South Africa's underperforming state-owned entities. And gold smuggling in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to defraud the government of millions in revenue. We'll have the details next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
The
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Now, there have been some pretty mixed reactions to the formation of a new council tasked with fixing South Africa's ailing state-owned entities. The state owns over 700 different businesses, but many of them are poorly managed and they're running at a loss. President Cyril Ramaphosa set up the council to help return many of these entities back into fiscal health and profitability. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidoo with a report.
10 members from business and government circles have been appointed to the Presidential State-Owned Enterprises Council. They've been tasked with implementing turnaround strategies and addressing immediate liquidity challenges.
A lot of the people on the council I have a lot of respect for. There are many ex-Treasury people, economists from the private sector, business people. I think they have a good chance of looking at the bigger picture and finding out what the 740 firms that South African government and municipalities own have to do to change course, because South Africa's taxpayers can no longer afford this.
The council has good credentials, but some analysts are questioning whether it will have any teeth.
The council must be put in a position to take decisions, and such decisions must be implemented. If not, this council will become another talking shop. We clearly need a more structured system of control over state-owned enterprises. It does not seem to me that the Department of State-Owned Enterprises is really in a position to exercise such oversight.
In February, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni said there would be no more funding for state-owned entities, SAA in particular. His predecessor, Pravin Gordhan, attempted to cut funding to the airline too, but didn't. Former Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene was fired, apparently because he too wanted to let go of these money-draining entities.
It has lost a lot of money through state guarantees to keep the airways operational. And indeed, there's also an opportunity cost where these companies operated at a higher cost base. It means they were not in a position to pay the government any dividends.
We look at Eskom, which has huge losses, is having to fight for its life at the moment. There's Denel, they can't pay their staff properly. They haven't paid pensions and taxes over to the government for a while. So this council was created to look at the whole picture.
State-owned entities are critically important to transformation, equality, and creating access to the poor. The ailing ones have had the complete opposite consequence for South Africans. Many are putting their hopes on this council to turn those entities around. Others believe all this is just a waste of time and money. Sumitra Naidoo, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
A United Nations probe has unearthed network smuggling gold out of the Democratic Republic of Congo and into global supply chains. That report details the illegal exports of the mineral into the United Arab Emirates, as well as into Burundi, Rwanda and Tanzania. All of those countries, with the exception of the UAE, of course, have a border with the DRC. The UN group of experts behind this report estimates that at least 1.1 tons of gold was smuggled out of Ituri province, that's in the eastern end of the DRC, last year alone. That would have earned the government up to $1.88 million in taxes if it had been legally exported. The DRC has been counting millions in losses as trade in the precious metal continues to fuel regional conflicts and fund rebel groups in the region. It has also led to UN sanctions on traders involved in a bid to stop the flow of this illicit commodity. Egypt is set to reopen all of its airports on the 1st of July. This comes after suspending regular international flights due to the coronavirus pandemic. The country's aviation minister, Mohammed Mana Anbar, says that tourism will be limited initially to resorts in 3 coastal airports. He adds that the government has outlined a range of measures to be taken inside planes, at airports and in hotels to help in ensuring the safety and the health of all incoming visitors. Tourists from countries with high COVID-19 caseloads will require testing before they arrive in Egypt. At the moment, Egypt has 44,500 cases. 1,575 people have died of COVID-19 so far.
Hopefully, on July the 1st, we will resume flights in all airports of the Republic. Perhaps there was some confusion the last period. Tourism will be on the coastal cities, as the Minister of Tourism will explain. Regarding all other airports, flights will resume gradually alongside the countries that intend to reopen with us on July the 1st.
On July 1st, as His Excellency the Minister of Aviation has said, we will begin to receive tourists in only 3 provinces to begin with. Those 3 provinces are South Sinai, Red Sea and the Matru. These 3 provinces were chosen because they are coastal cities and are far away from large population gatherings. They also have some of the least coronavirus cases around the country.
Egypt's neighbor to the south, Sudan, is expected to keep its airports closed to international and domestic flights until the 28th of June. Now, this comes after the government shut down the airports back in March as part of measures really around the world designed to combat the spread of COVID-19. Sudan's Civil Aviation Authority spokesperson Abdul Hafiz Abdul Rahim says that the airports will only be opened to flights transporting cargo, humanitarian aid, oil organization workers or evacuating foreigners. And staying in Sudan, the government over there is also expected to start rolling out an experimental program of direct cash transfers to the neediest of its citizens. This is part of a broader set of efforts to wean the country of costly and essentially unsustainable subsidies. Under this pilot program, the government will transfer $9 per person each month, starting in Khartoum's West Soba district. The cash payments are expected to be adjusted for inflation. At the moment, that's about 100%. The government recently started talks with the International Monetary Fund on a non-funded program that eventually could pave the way, in theory, for international financial support, with the country's foreign debt load estimated at about $62 billion. Now, speaking of debt, Zambia has requested the Paris Club of Creditor Nations to allow the suspension of principal and interest payments on debts to all of its official creditors. The payments in question are scheduled for between May to the end of December. Despite struggling with falling demand and prices for copper, the continent's second largest producer of that commodity says it's still committed to servicing its debt payments, at least the ones that fell due before the 1st of May. Zambia's external debt rose to 45% of GDP last year, up from 37% the year before. According to the World Bank, Zambia's total debt stock is now estimated to be about 89% of GDP. The country is among the nations that are eligible for relief under the debt service suspension. That's a program that aims to help nations respond to COVID-19 health challenges and the economic shocks that have followed. Into East Africa now, Kenya's largest telecommunications operator, Safaricom, whose growth has been fueled by its dominance of the mobile financial services market, is hoping that a venture into agriculture might be its next big thing. As CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar now explains, DigiFarm could be the safe haven that farmers have been looking for.
Kenyan farmers situated in the Rift Valley town of Bomet are celebrating their most bountiful harvest yet, thanks to DigiFarm. This is the latest innovation by Kenya's biggest telecoms operator, Safaricom. It allows farmers to receive loans to buy seeds, pesticides and fertilizer.
They, Safaricom DigiFarm, have really helped us. They give us maize seeds and fertilizer that we have utilized and our maize grew.
We had not planted or harvested any maize here for the last 6 years. So when they came and gave us seeds and followed up with training on how to farm better, we have benefited from it and we're proud of this program.
Under this program, farmers are granted $100 of credit per acre of maize. This is then repaid with 15% interest once the crop is sold. Once the maize is collected, DigiFarm organizes for a buyer who pays 31 US cents per kilogram of maize, up from 28 US cents offered by traditional brokers.
DigiFarm was the idea is to take the small-scale farmer out of the cycle of poverty by allowing or providing a way in which small-scale farmers could borrow money, buy high-quality input, help farmers manage the growth period, and then buy the crop at the end, and so that the farmer could get a good price for their crop and repay the loan and then go through another cycle where they'd get more money, etc., etc.
The farmer benefits a lot because this one reports better than, unlike manual where I could write down and then I take the papers to the office. This paperwork involves a lot of work. So with this one, as I aggregate here, all the information goes there, and then the farmers are paid within 7 hours.
Despite concerns looming over climate change, DigiFarm offers farmers insurance against weather disasters. About 1,000 farmers enrolled with DigiFarm are getting payouts after floods destroyed their crops. With farming accounting for a third of the country's annual economic output, DigiFarm could be the haven that farmers have been seeking in recent years. Mohammed Abubakar, CGTN.
At 18:30 GMT, you're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how France is getting back to business after a pretty long lockdown. And online viewers of esports tournaments are rising to record highs in China. We'll have the numbers next.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. All have different stories, from Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Kenya, 4 staff members at State House Nairobi, which is the country's official seat of power, have tested positive for COVID-19. This has been confirmed by the State House spokesperson, Kanzit Dana. A statement said that the 4 tested positive in the wake of mass testing done last week Thursday. The infected officials have since been admitted at a medical facility in the outskirts of Nairobi for further treatment. The spokesperson also said that Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta and his family are safe and free of the virus. Elsewhere in the Horn of Africa, Djibouti is hosting the first round of talks between the federal government of Somalia and Somaliland. It's a breakaway region of northern Somalia. Both sides are meeting for the first time in 5 years. Djibouti President Ismail Omar Guelleh and the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali are both attending those talks. For close to 3 decades, Somaliland has been looking for global recognition. It's now insisting on a 2-state solution. Tunisia says it's committed to a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Libya. The country's foreign minister, Noureddin Rey, says that he's called for more dialogue to end the fighting in the neighboring region, saying that Libya's stability is crucial for Tunisia's future well-being. And finally, a UN investigation has uncovered a network that smuggles gold from the Democratic Republic of Congo and feeds it into global supply chains. That report details how illegal exports of the precious metal to the UAE, as well as Burundi, Rwanda and Tanzania took place, and how the proceeds from its sale were laundered. The UN probe estimates that at least 1.1 tons of gold was smuggled out of Ituri province in 2019 alone. Here's what's coming up next. Now then, on to Nissan. There's fresh data that's coming out to support the claims by the company's former chairman, Carlos Ghosn, of being set up. According to people familiar with what happened, the campaign by top Nissan executives to dethrone one of the most celebrated leaders in the automotive industry started nearly a year before Ghosn was arrested in late 2018. He's accused by authorities in Japan of alleged financial misconduct. The new information reveals that the effort was motivated in part by some pretty deep opposition to the former chairman's push for greater integration between the Japanese car maker on one hand and its longtime alliance partner, Renault. A chain of email correspondence dating back to February 2018 paints a picture of a rather methodical campaign to remove the powerful executive. This information comes to light as another former Nissan executive and the company itself face a looming trial in Tokyo. Things are gradually getting back to normal in France after the French President Emmanuel Macron announced that he was accelerating plans to further ease the country's lockdown. Cafes and restaurants are reopening across France today, and travel to other European countries is now allowed. People will also be able to visit family members in retirement homes, which have been particularly hard hit in this pandemic. The announcement marked the third phase of the easing of restrictions since France ended its strict 8-week lockdown on the 11th of May. These are some of the views from the capital.
We're very happy to see the daily life again.
Back to life, back to reality.
It's good news that we are able to go back into a green warning because maybe it wasn't necessary to keep such strict measures.
It's both a relief and a worry. We are in between because we are not sure what the future holds. Will we have to go back on the measures? So for the moment, I have mixed feelings.
All right, then let's get the latest on this from Natalie Powell. She joins us now live from London. So, Natalie, walk us through the data points being used by policymakers here, like infections per 100,000 people, for example, that might compel the government to reimpose limitations on movement and trade.
Well, France has approached its response to the coronavirus by declaring areas as either red, orange or green zones, depending on the severity of the virus and its infection rate there. At the moment, we know that the whole of the country, apart from 2 overseas departments, is now in the green, meaning that the circulation of the virus is below 6%. But, of course, if it were to increase into orange, which means that circulation would go between 6 and 10%, or worse still, red, which is over 10%, then, of course, the government will think about reintroducing restrictions. There's just one caveat to all of that, and that is the fact that the government's own scientific advisors have actually come out to say that even if there were a second wave of the virus in France, there wouldn't be a nationwide lockdown with the severity that we have seen so far, saying that the price of that would just be far too high to pay. So it's more likely that what will happen, of course, is that it will be a more localized response. For the next 4 months, France enters a sort of transition period where the government will have the right to reimpose certain restrictions. But as I say, there will likely be a much more local response to that as opposed to a nationwide lockdown.
Indeed. So this does boil down to economic damage, doesn't it? Because I guess the thinking in France, in the Champs-Élysées, was probably, look, this is the economic damage we had with the lockdown in the past, and we simply cannot do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, France has had one of the strictest lockdowns in Europe. The French president said that has saved hundreds and thousands of lives. And in fact, the death toll at the moment is around about 25 deaths per day. That looks pretty good when you compare it to other places, notably here in the UK. But when it comes to the economic damage, well, the numbers really do speak for themselves. And the French economy is expected to shrink by over 10% this year. And remember, it wasn't in that much of a great shape before then because of nationwide protests, yellow vest protests, pension reform protests that had brought parts of the country to a standstill even prior to the coronavirus pandemic. In addition to that, the French government has spent around 500 billion euros in support for things like businesses. Around 300 billion of that has gone to trying to prop up its businesses, and that is likely to increase public debt. Interestingly, though, President Emmanuel Macron has said that he's not going to increase public taxes, and he wants to get France into a more sustainable economic shape and less reliant on other countries. But it's very clear that he has a big economic job ahead as he tries to re-stimulate what is a very damaged economy at the moment.
Indeed, we'll see how that does play out. Natalie Powell in London. Thank you. Now, hundreds of mask-wearing sun-seekers from Germany have landed in the Spanish island of Mallorca. The group of tourists is the first to be allowed into the country since the borders were essentially shut back in March. More than 10,000 German holidaymakers are likely to head to Spain as part of this pilot project. This comes as the country is gradually starting to open up to more tourists in the weeks to come. The nation is keen to restart business in this sector, and it's particularly vital. It accounts for roughly 12% of GDP. Hotels, however, are limited to about 50% occupancy. They will have infrared cameras pretty much everywhere to measure the body temperature of test participants. The total number of those participants is actually capped at 10,900. Spain is one of the world's most popular tourist destinations. It will reopen its borders to most European visitors on the 21st of June and progressively to the rest of the world from the 1st of July. The COVID-19 pandemic has killed nearly 9,000 people while infecting nearly 200,000 more in Germany, home to the European Union's largest economy. Now, that translates to about 10 deaths per 100,000 people. The fatality rate in Germany is actually a fraction of that in the United Kingdom. The equivalent number for that country is closer to 60. As Natalie Carney now reports, the data suggests that the German government's response to the pandemic has helped to keep fatalities relatively low.
Germany is being applauded both at home and abroad for its response to COVID-19. The country's first confirmed case in January was a worker at a company near Munich, and authorities acted quickly, testing other workers and tracing everyone who'd been in contact with the infected employee.
Sie hatten potenziell mit einer Covid-19 positiv getesteten Person Kontakt.
Walter Leonhard works as a contact tracer in the southern city of Rosenheim, informing people who have come within 1.5 meters of a positive case for at least 15 minutes that they too could be infected.
And regularly all of them have to go into quarantine. The only exclusion is when you are in a medical service. Some are really scared and some say, yeah, it's okay, of course, I'll do everything, no problem. And some people even are very angry and don't want to follow that. But to be honest, this is a minority of people who are very angry.
We get our information from the local health authority. They, on the other hand, get it from the hospitals or doctors who test people. We then find the contact persons. These contacts I then directly pass on to the contact tracing team. They will call all the people concerned and send them into quarantine.
Hallo, grüß Gott.
While such a program is not unique to Germany, it has been essential in helping the country tackle COVID-19 by isolating those who could potentially be infected. There were also many other factors that contributed to Germany's ability to keep infection rates and deaths relatively low, says physician and professor of infectious disease Andrew Ullman.
Many people accepted the partial shutdown that we had, but grocery stores remained open, pharmacies remained open. There was a good discipline in public transportation, and what is more important, the healthcare system worked very nicely. The hospitals were not overrun, and the other thing that was very important, that we very early on had testing available throughout Germany, so it was not only a reference laboratory in Berlin, it was basically all university hospitals had the same test kit at the same time.
But despite its success, the government has faced harsh criticism over its coronavirus response, with Chancellor Angela Merkel and state leaders branded dictators.
While the number of infected people may be on the decline here in Germany, the World Health Organization warns that the risk is still very much out there as countries around the world begin to open up. To help control the spread, the German health ministry has announced that a mobile app which traces the coronavirus infections should be available to the public in the coming days.
Fewer cases means less work for trackers like Walter Leonhard, but with a second wave expected, they won't be losing their jobs anytime soon. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Rosenheim.
On to China now. The housing demand over there was hit pretty hard by this pandemic in the first quarter of the year, but the sector is starting to show some signs of recovery. With a broader economic recovery across the world's second largest economy now underway, the housing market showed some strength in the month of May. Official data indicates that home prices in many major cities actually rose month on month.
A recovery in China's housing market was more apparent in May than in April. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics released Monday showed that 57 out of 70 major cities saw month-on-month home price growth in May, compared with 50 cities in April. Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen and Guangzhou, the biggest four cities, saw new home prices rose 0.7% month-on-month in May. That's 0.5 percentage points higher than in April.
5月整体的这个数据相当于4月环比都出现了一个增长。
Home price growth in May was more obvious than in April. That's as more buyers come back to the market and developers put more new homes on the market.
China's central bank lowered its 5-year loan prime rate 10 basis points in April. That, together with the loosening of household registration system in some lower-tier cities, helped unleash some pent-up demand. But there was a divergence in the property recovery between different regions.
First-tier cities saw more home price growth than lower-tier cities in this round of market recovery starting from April. And cities with strong economies, such as those in the Yangtze Delta region, saw more home price growth than less developed areas.
Also in May, some developers suffered financial difficulties and some of their projects were suspended. Experts warn of risks in buying new homes.
买房的时候还是要选择有品牌的这些大的这种企业。
We advise buyers to choose big-name developers with good reputations and try to avoid choosing the cheapest projects and projects with very high land costs.
Experts say the market will continue to recover in June, but prices will not rise quickly as the government will stick to its principle that houses are for living in, not speculation. Zheng Junfeng, CGTN.
Now, the pandemic, of course, has kept away crowds of fans when a Chinese esports team, TS Gaming, defeated AG Superplay in Shanghai on Saturday to win the 2020 King Pro League Spring Season title. But a record online audience tuned in. CGTN's Yang Qingxing filed this report for What's Hot tonight.
This is the venue for the spring season finale of the King Pro League. It is a competition involving one of the world's most popular mobile esports game, Honor of Kings. However, this year's competition is being held with one key difference than in years past. No on-site audiences, thanks to COVID-19. This is the quietest KPL arena so far. But that doesn't mean it's in any way less popular among China's avid esports fans.
The participation of this year's online audience has grown by about 50%.
Organizers say online viewership this year had already hit new highs during the preliminaries in March, when they moved the entire competition online. That means esports have, with the way they're played, warded off the impact of COVID-19 on sporting activities. Player numbers have been rising steadily in the past 3 years for esports in China, and industry experts say the stay-at-home lifestyle for many in 2020 has in some ways supported the further growth of this number.
We're expanding our operations in Shanghai. In March, we launched our competition broadcast center here.
The municipal government of Shanghai wants to turn the city into a global esports hub. Commercial interests in this industry in Shanghai have been picking up steam. The venue of this year's KPL is one of the newly constructed projects that cater for esports competitions and activities.
We have other cooperation projects in the pipeline in other districts of Shanghai.
In 2018, esports were officially incorporated in the Jakarta Asian Games. and the industry is getting more and more mainstream recognition in the sporting world. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices for you. Let's focus on gold for this particular segment. Spot gold prices are up by about 13% so far this year, but those notional gains don't seem to be translating over into the value of gold mining firms. Well, at least not all of them. Spot gold, for example, shared about 0.6% today, just over $17-20 a troy ounce. But the share price of bullion miners like Sibanye-Stillwater, 8.9% in the red. Harmony Gold also fell in today's session, essentially wiping out all of the year's gains. Anglo Gold Ashanti, however, has largely held on to the gains it's made in the second quarter. It's up by nearly 30% since the start of April. Here's what's coming up next. We'll bring you the story of a Congolese designer who's opted for virtual shows as the pandemic shuts down global runways.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's jump into the world of fashion. A US-based Congolese designer, Anifa Mwemba, debuted her latest collection through 3D renderings on Instagram Live last month in a groundbreaking display of what is possible in what is essentially now the new normal for the world of fashion. And she's not alone in doing this. Major brands have had to cancel shows altogether because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has spurred designers to look for innovative ways to display the latest and greatest creations. CGTN's Alexander Majala has that story.
One of the world's most iconic fashion stages was set to be Anifa Mwemba's debut in the elite world of trendsetters. But thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, the New York Fashion Week was cancelled. Mwemba's cancelled show sparked her creativity. The 29-year-old designer held a virtual show in May for her latest collection called Pink Label Congo. Her 3D animated event was watched by tens of thousands of people who streamed it on her Anifa Instagram Live page.
The entire world is home, on their phones. This is like the best time to do this. Like, this is the best time. So we're like, I gather my team. I'm like, look, guys, this is our timeline. I know it's really short, but we have to get this done because at the same time we see with the COVID situation, some places are slowly easing their restrictions and people are able to come outside. I said, everyone is home, everyone's on their phones. Let's get this done. Let's put this show out and let's just do it.
The fashion industry has been hit hard by coronavirus lockdowns, and designers have gone virtual or adapted in other ways to meet restrictions put in place to contain the pandemic. The US-based Congolese designer said she was using 3D animation months before the pandemic to design her pieces and to do remote photo shoots. But the virtual show required more work, including transforming each garment into a 3D image and using the body of an avatar to tailor the item with precise measurements.
It was hard because we had to make sure that it matched the like realistic garment. Like, we had a really hard time making sure like a dress flowed like naturally and how it would flow if a curvy woman was wearing it. We had to make sure that it fit everything the right way. We had to make sure that the colors looked good. We had to make sure that the prints looked good. So that part was really stressful, but I mean, we were working up until the last second of like before the show was presented to the world.
Mvwemba's collection was inspired by the clothes that women wore in her native country. She's using her fashion line to raise awareness of child labor within the Democratic Republic of Congo's coltan mining industry. Mvwemba plans to do more 3D shows, but would still like to see her designs showcased on a real runway someday soon. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And you've got to wonder, after this, who's going to go back to actually runway shows? One other story for you. Stabilizing foreign trade is a priority for policymakers in China. Measures they have introduced so far have essentially allowed export-oriented companies to find new opportunities to expand, even amid all the damage being done by this pandemic. E-commerce is at the heart of that recovery plan.
This coffee company in Guangzhou is among the over 400,000 export-oriented companies in China. It is ramping up the production of a new batch of export orders, and this time they will sell their goods directly to overseas consumers via cross-border e-commerce platform instead of going through middlemen.
We used to make $2 out of 19 for exporting one coffee maker. Now we can sell it up to $40 by trading directly with our consumers. Our profits increased by 50%.
More and more Chinese enterprises are looking for new opportunities with the help of cross-border e-commerce. Data from AliExpress shows that the number of stores has more than doubled on its platform since March. In the meantime, the Chinese government has also taken steps to bolster foreign trade. The Chinese State Council said earlier this year that China will establish 46 new cross-border e-commerce pilot zones to support foreign trade. Retail export goods will be exempted from value-added and consumption taxes there. Experts say that the government and enterprises should work in tandem to seek more opportunities.
We should guide companies to deal with the crisis amid the sluggish external demands. At the same time, the government should also encourage companies to produce more innovative products and guarantee their logistics demands.
Lily Lu, CGTN.
A run through the currencies as we wrap up the hour for you. Let's focus on the currencies of commodity producers. In fact, the top two worst performing currencies here in Africa, they're all from commodity producers over the last 12 weeks. Angola and Zambia's currencies have ceded 18% and about 10% respectively to the dollar over that period. Ethiopia's tightly controlled currency, the birr, that's also losing ground. It's roughly 7% lower against the American dollar. The rand has also started the week on the back foot, 17.26 to the greenback, as investors are fleeing essentially to safer asset classes. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on this program over the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.